We are live. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Kasanova podcast. This one's sponsored by the number 8 bus going to Waipahu because it's right there at my window and you can clearly hear it. I have got special guest with me, Segalacious. Segalacious, go ahead and introduce people to yourself.
Hey, what's up, Mekel? Thanks for having me back. I'm Segalacious of the channel Oh So Jiggly. We usually just talk about video games, but I've been listening to Mekel's podcast and talk about political stuff. Like your video today, by the way, about the media not being neutral and like having a script, like it's all scripted and controlled by like the same corporations and stuff. Like that was amazing. So all that kind of stuff gets me really excited. So I thought I would follow your lead and jump off the cliff and throw my hat into the ring of politics because I got excited. I want to talk about it with you because you have a lot of really cool ideas. So.
I appreciate that, man. It's just, like I was saying before we started the podcast, like, this is a lot of things that I was told growing up, and, I'm finding out a lot of things weren't true. A lot of things my parents told me weren't true. And it's just, I just feel like I need to say something about it because one of the worst things is, I'm turning 30 and to realize that 29 years of my life have been lied to. Like that's quite the thing,
That's quite the rude awakening to realize that, at that point too, do you just feel like it was more about like social and economic opportunities are different than what you had been raised to expect, or is that what you mean?
Yeah, exactly, like social economic opportunities. There's also that, the law is definitely against me because of my skin color, being part black, and just it's amazing, that being told that the system, quote unquote, the boogeyman system, like I said in one of my other videos, is purely out to get me. Like it's all against me, that I will never be successful because of this color of my skin. And I feel like that's a very dangerous indoctrination that you could impose on your children, and it's something that I would like to see. I know it won't end in my lifetime, but hopefully in the coming generations it will stop. And it just kind of scares me, given that I do have children, and I know I have some friends on Twitter and also other YouTubers I know that that are teachers to kids, and they're also black individuals, and they've said on Twitter, like, they will talk to their black students and tell them about the oppression that they were faced, but they would never tell that to the white students. And that kind of stuff scares me about the type of mentality that's being pushed, that paranoia. So
I see. Well, and in our country, in the United States of America, we've made a lot of progress since the civil rights movement. Yeah. And things are far from perfect, but hopefully we'll continue to keep making things better, and safer for everybody. But listening to you over the past few weeks, and like I said, I've been really enjoying it because like just some of your ideas are really cool, and some of the things you were saying are very cogent and refreshing. Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I want to try to connect with your train of thought a little bit, because is it that you feel frustration with the political situation in our country, particularly with what's called the left, because of identity politics?
Yes, that is exactly it.
Right. And part of that frustration, and I don't want to put any words in your mouth or anything, but I feel like a lot of the reason a lot of people get frustrated with identity politics is because people are individuals. Mm-hmm. And they want to be treated like individuals. And sometimes I think that a lot of policies on the left and a lot of the ideology on the left makes people feel like they're not being honored as individuals from an ideological standpoint.
I agree.
Right. And, especially in Western culture and in our country in particular, our founding documents and, our philosophy and our cultural mores, those are all based on putting the individual first before the group. It's all about protecting the rights of the individual from the mob mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to talk about how in Western thought, a lot of our political philosophies and things like that are based off of the works of great thinkers like Thomas Hobbes, who came up, he kind of spurred a lot of the development of social contract theory, right? So like the whole idea of like even having a government and having it be legitimate and why we even have one, it really kind of started there because according to John Hobbes, he was saying that in a state of nature, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like you have unlimited freedom. But at the same time, because human nature is somewhat brutish, to put it lightly, people become, super violent and there's no regulation. And, it just wouldn't be a very happy existence for most people. It would be very like Darwinian and most people don't want to live that way. So his idea was, okay, the reason people form governments is because what they do is they go, okay, I'm going to give up my unlimited freedom to do whatever I want to anyone else in the state of nature. I'm going to give up some of those freedoms so that I can have a little bit of security in this, enclosed space where I'm protected. And, I make some compromises with society in order to live among them and have some security. And so that way I don't have to live in this crazy dog eat dog world,
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with social contract theory is a lot of times, like you'll hear somebody say like, gee, I don't really think it's fair that that the government can tell me that I can't collect rainwater, or something like that. Or, hey, I went out like yesterday, I went out to pick some mushrooms. I was picking some morels. Have you ever had those before?
No, I don't think. Well, maybe I have.
I don't know what kind of mushrooms grow in Hawaii, but morels are like a gourmet delicacy, and they sell for like $40 a pound, like at a farmer's market,
Mm-hmm.
And so like we found those, and we chopped them up and battered them and fried them, and like they're really good. But one of my friends was telling me that another of his buddies had gone out and got like 5 pounds of these mushrooms, and he was like, "Sweet, I'm gonna fry these up, baby." And he was walking out, and some police saw him with all those mushrooms, and it was like a civil forfeiture. Like the police said, like, "Look, like we don't suspect you of a crime, we suspect your property of a crime. Like we are suspicious of your mushrooms, so we're just gonna take those. And since you live in this society, you're consenting to this, like social contract theory, right? Like it can be abused."
Wow.
But like after John Locke, you get to, or not John Locke, I'm sorry. After Thomas Hobbes, you get to people like Montesquieu, the French philosopher, where he was saying, okay, so you have a government, but the problem is in that social contract, you got to make sure it's a good contract. So maybe to help alleviate the potential for tyranny, you have a separation of powers, checks and balances, have a system of checks and balances. And, we have that with the legislative branch, the judicial branch and the executive branch. And they're supposed to be keeping each other in check so that they're not, one branch doesn't get too much power and they don't start, terrorizing everyone. And then you get to John Locke. And John Locke believed that people were born as like a blank slate, which is not really true. I think in psychology and biology, they've proved that like people aren't born as a blank slate. But the reason he brought that up was he was saying that everybody's born equal. And you know how it says in the Declaration of Independence, we believe that all men are created equal.
Right.
Like the idea is that by virtue of your humanity, you have fundamental inalienable rights. And that those rights include the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to own property. And so that's called the natural law. And so basically, you get the Declaration of Independence, which is saying like, okay, look, we get that we were under the social contract of England, but due to the fact that England has begun to infringe upon our natural rights, we have the right to make a new social contract so that our fundamental natural rights are protected. And so like these Enlightenment philosophers like formed basically the foundation for natural law.
Yeah.
So, and that's all about individuality.
Yeah, it's true.
So, just let me know if I'm talking too much or if you ever
No,
want to.
no,
Yeah.
keep going, man.
Okay, cool. Well, okay. Have you ever heard of this French economist from the 1800s, early 1800s, late 1700s, named Frederick Bastiat?
Frederick Bastiat. No, I have not.
He's really, really cool, and he wrote this withering critique against socialism. Actually, he wrote a lot of different critiques against socialism. Um, like, for example, he's got this one collection of works. It's called Economic Sophisms.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically just makes fun of how socialists don't know what they're talking about. So,
Okay.
like in France, socialism was the darling of intellectual thinkers for a long, long time, and socialism didn't finally start to be totally debunked until like the 1970s, as a system, as a viable economic system.
Mm-hmm.
And but even long before then, people were poking holes in it, like Bastiat. And he was like, one of the things was the socialist politicians and thinkers were saying that, hey, if there's a storm and all the windows get broken in town, that actually helps the economy.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the broken window fallacy, because if everybody's windows get broken, then they all have to spend money to get their windows fixed, and that creates jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all getting richer. So it's a good thing that we had this natural disaster, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Bastiat was like, no, because now all those shop owners don't have money to hire somebody because they had to pay for a new window. It didn't make us richer. It just made us poorer, but everybody took all their money from one pocket and put it in a different pocket, Like the overall wealth didn't increase. It just changed. It was just reallocated. And in fact, on like the net wealth of the nation went down, even though it looks like from the window repairman perspective that the economy is booming. It's really not, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So like just little things like that. But he wrote this book called The Law, and it's one of my favorite books. It's about 70 pages long, and I had a copy around here somewhere. I couldn't find it, but I might just send you a link, and I invite you to read it sometime because it's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, he talks about how the only, how should I say it? The only way that the law can be legitimate, the only functional, legitimate purpose for the law and for government is to protect your natural rights to life, liberty, and property. And so the state can only ever function to uphold these rights, because in a state of nature, not everybody is strong enough to uphold their own natural rights. Like even in a state of nature, like if you're in a tribe or something, or you're in a hunter-gatherer society, you still have the right to be left alone. You have the right to live, and you have the right to have your own property. But that doesn't mean that some strong guy's gonna respect that. So you might not be strong enough to protect your own rights, so you need help, right? So you can agree to this social contract where the government says, okay, look, you pay a little bit of taxes, and we'll make sure nobody kills you, nobody enslaves you, and nobody takes your stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sounds pretty good, right? Like that's kind of a minimalistic view of, I guess you could call it like minarchy, like a minimalist government that it can't be tyrannical because it's treating you like an individual, and it's only protecting your individuality, and that's its only function.
Yeah. And that's like kind of like what the Republican Party pretty much, or they should stand for.
Sure. Well, and that's what the founding fathers were saying. They're like, okay, we need to design a government that, like, we can't let it get screwed up, because if we make a government, it's possible that somebody's going to hijack it and use it to their own means, and like use it to their own ends, and use people as a means to their own ends and infringe on their rights to get gain. And we can't let that happen. So we've got to figure out how to make a government that has a separation of powers, so that we can guarantee that the government will never overstep its bounds and will only serve to protect the natural rights of its citizens.
Yeah.
And they did a pretty good job. Of course, it wasn't perfect, because, there's the glaring problem of having slavery in the Constitution, like the 3/5 compromise.
Yeah.
But I mean, that was a hotly contested topic. Like half of the founding fathers were pretty unhappy with the idea of slavery. And, that's something they always wanted to get rid of from day one. But, they had to compromise because England was, breathing down their neck the whole time. They had to hurry up and get something together.
Okay.
But the point is that when you talk about rights, people don't understand how rights should work. Because you'll hear people say, I have the right to an education. I have the right to your respect. I have the right to a place to live. Like they'll say these kinds of things. But see, those are services, right? Like I have the right to cable TV. I have the right to internet. I have the right to air conditioning. I have the right to indoor plumbing. It's kind of like, well, I mean, I would like you to have those things. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm not saying that if somebody didn't have those things that we shouldn't help them necessarily. But you got to understand that rights are not something that is a service.
Yeah.
Rights are actually, it's a negative concept, right? So what I mean by negative rights is that you basically have the right to be left alone. You don't have the right to require other people to do things for you. And that's a really subtle difference. Like when you have the right to life, that means people can't come kill you, right? It doesn't mean I have the right to life, so you need to come, you have to feed me. It doesn't mean that. It means you have the right to be left alone. And that's the difference between negative rights and positive rights. And I feel like a lot of people on the left, especially people, well, and actually on the right too, but a lot of the activists that are going around now and talking about the rights that they want, they're actually asking for positive rights, which are not our natural rights as outlined by the Enlightenment thinkers.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Keep going. Yeah, I mean,
okay.
I'm loving what you're saying. The audience is loving what you're saying.
Okay, cool.
I'm giving you the floor.
Okay, sure thing. Cool. Yeah, I didn't want to overstep myself. So, all right. So, okay. So we've got the natural law, and it's got those three main components: life, liberty, and property. And you can think of it like a three-legged stool. If you take away one leg, the stool falls over. And you'll always get somebody, especially a socialist or a neo-Marxist, they'll say, well, the right to life trumps the right to property. So I will infringe on people's right to property in order to protect their lives. But it doesn't work like that. You can't infringe on one right without infringing on all three. Obviously, if you infringe on someone's right to life, if you kill them, then they can't be free because they're dead. And they can't own anything because they're not alive.
Right.
So that infringes on all three if you take away their life. If you take away their liberty, then they're a slave. A slave can't own anything. The product of a slave belongs to the slave owner. Like if you have a farm and a chicken lays eggs, those eggs aren't the chicken, they're the farmer's. Those aren't the chicken's eggs anymore, right? Because it's owned by the farmer. Like you have to have liberty in order to have ownership of something. So if you take away somebody's liberty, then their property is yours by default. So that infringes the right to property. Also, if you take somebody's liberty, you're saying that their life is yours to take or give as you see fit. Okay, go to property. What if you infringe on somebody's right to property? What's the most fundamental, basic form of property there is? How about food? If you tell somebody that they don't have a right to their own property, they don't have a right to the fruits of their labors, then you're saying you can take away their food whenever you want. Well, obviously, if you take their means of survival away, and it doesn't even have to be food, it can be their means of living. It can be their equipment for their job. It can be their home, their shelter. It can be their water. We need material things to stay alive. And those material things are our property. They become our property through our labor. If we work to obtain something, that thing becomes ours, as long as it's not obtained through theft, right?
Right.
So, I mean, this is just a very basic, like, bird's eye view of this. But what I'm saying is, if you take away somebody's property, you could conceivably, if you take away their right to property, you could conceivably take away all their food and they would die. That infringes on their right to life. And as we explored earlier, if somebody doesn't own their property, then they aren't really free. Because everything they do has to go to the person who owns them. So you can't take somebody's property without taking their freedom. Right? So there's no such thing as I'm infringing on your right to property in order to protect your right to life. It doesn't work like that. And that's something that Frederick Bastiat pointed out. So I really recommend checking that out. It's called The Law. And it's really cool because he talks about how people say, okay, that's all well and good, but you can't let people be that free because, as Thomas Hobbes said, people are brutish. You can't trust human nature. People are going to kill each other. So sometimes you just have to step in and infringe on their rights or else nobody will survive. So we have to put these people in power in order to protect people from themselves. And this is the thing you're going to hear a lot, especially from the left, but also from the right as well. The right does this just as much. They'll say, we've got to protect you from yourself.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. Well, what they're saying is you can't trust human nature. And I get that human beings have the propensity for animosity and violence and genocide. That's true. We do have that potential within ourselves. But you can't acknowledge that fact without also acknowledging our potential for benevolence and for productivity and goodness as well. And the thing is, if you say, let's say for the sake of argument, you go, okay, fine. You know what? You're right. Human beings can't be trusted with their own freedom. You've got to protect them from themselves, like children, right? You need an adult. So we're all adults already, though. So who are we going to put over us to watch over us, right? It's like the Lord of the Flies. Like, there are no adults. We're it. If you put somebody in a government position to protect us from ourselves because of human nature, the problem is that that person who you elect also is subordinate to human nature themselves. And so, like, that's a big problem. In fact, have you ever heard of Alan Watts?
Yes, I have.
Oh, he said something really funny one time. He's like this Taoist Eastern mysticism guy and a quasi-philosopher, but he said something funny. He was like, okay, if you can't trust human nature, then you can't trust your distrust of human nature.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Like, it's funny. It's like kind of circular, but you're going, oh yeah, man, that's true. Like, human nature is all we've got. At the end of the day, no matter how many people, like how good of a person you put and give them absolute power, they're still under human nature. So if you have to trust human nature, then trust everybody with their own freedom instead of just one person with everyone's freedom. You know, and like, that's Western thought. The ultimate minority is the individual. Yeah. And so, you know, another thing you'll hear is that, okay, but when you talk about economic freedom and you're saying, you know, it's wrong for the government to take somebody's property. Well, what if it's to take somebody's property to give to the poor, right? Like, I'm trying to infringe on your right to property in order to protect other people's right to life. But the problem is that, like, you could look at it this way. Here's how I've had it explained to me. Let's say you and I, Mekel, were walking down the street and we saw this hobo. And the hobo said, hey, man, let me hold $5. And you think, you know what? That guy could use a sandwich. And then I go, no, I'm good. I'm not going to give you that $5. Let's say this guy, you know, like he's not like a nasty, crusty drug dealer guy or something, you know, or an alcoholic. I'm like, maybe he really just did need that $5. Okay. Maybe it was the right thing to do to give him $5. Like, maybe I am being a jerk. I'm being a greedy jerk for not giving him that $5. But here's the question. If I say no, that may have been immoral of me. Okay. But is it right for you to then say, hold up a minute, Segalacious, you should help that guy out? And so you pull out your piece, right? You hold up your Glock 19 to my head and you go, you give that hobo $5. Is that okay to do? I'm just wondering, is it okay to hold somebody at gunpoint and force them to give to the poor? Is that a solution? Is that okay to do? What do you think? I mean, I know this is kind of a, what do you call it? What do you call those questions where it's like, I can't think of the word now because I'm on the spot, but
Open-ended.
not an open-ended question, but a question where you're like, you're not really supposed to answer it. What do you call it? Rhetorical. I know it sounds rhetorical, but like, I mean, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot either, but do you think it would be okay to hold a gun to someone's head and force them to give money to a homeless person if they didn't want to?
No, and that's to me like the whole concept of socialism right there.
Mm-hmm. It's fake.
Yeah.
They pretend to be on the side. They pretend to have the moral high ground because they say, I'm helping the poor. But no, if the way you're helping the poor is with force, if it's with coercion, then you don't actually have the moral high ground. It's called false philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
And you're actually hurting society more. Like, I agree that it's probably the right thing to do to give to the poor.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't achieve morality through force.
It has to be choice.
Yeah. You have to let people decide to do that. It's got to be done on an individual level. And so that's really what Frederick Bastiat was saying. So basically, he pointed out that you have to let people be free.
Mm-hmm.
And that civil freedom is important, and that's what a lot of people are fighting for. You have a lot of civil libertarians out there, you know. I think a lot of people on the left, you could identify them as that, as somebody who says, look, like, I think we should be nice to people. I don't think we should be racist to them. I don't think we should be homophobic or transphobic. I think we should just let people live their lifestyles as long as they're not hurting anybody. And I agree with that. The problem is, so those are civil liberties, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't have civil liberties without economic liberties too. They go hand in hand. If you take away somebody's economic liberty, if they can't choose to buy what they want or put their money where they want, then they're not actually choosing how they interact in society. And so, you know, that's really, that is the concept that we've lost in our country and in Western culture in general. People have compromised. They've been given this smokescreen where they're saying, hey, you're being immoral because you're not helping the less fortunate. And if you don't, and it's kind of silly because they'll say, if you don't support the government helping the less fortunate, then that means you're against helping the less fortunate. When maybe that's not the case at all. Maybe you just don't like the idea of forced philanthropy and you think it should be done voluntarily.
Yeah, because there's a lot of virtue signaling that's going on with that, especially with the left and a lot of the right too. A lot of I guess you could pull it and say like the alt-right as well.
Yes.
There's a lot of the virtue signaling, and you can't take a more high ground to force someone else to do something against their will. Like, that's infringing on their
liberty.
Yeah.
Exactly, man. And you hit the nail on the head right there, because you pointed out people on the far right want to force people to do what they want them to do. And people on the far left also want to force people to do what they want. They're not disagreeing about force. They're just disagreeing on what to force people to do. But what's the difference? Persuasion's better than force, in my opinion. If an idea is really good, if it's really a good idea, then you shouldn't have to force somebody to accept it. People will do it voluntarily because, oh, that is a good idea. I will do it. I will naturally decide to do that. And I mean, there are some people who, even if something's a good idea, they don't do it. But if they choose that, then they also choose the consequences. And if you don't allow people to choose their own consequences, then you eliminate personal responsibility. And then you've lost the protection of individual freedoms that Western philosophy and culture and civilization was founded on.
Yep, that's true.
So I think that with a lot of the identity politics, it falls into the trap of false philanthropy, where you think you're the good guy because you're trying to stop racism. And I agree with stopping racism. But, and see, this is where I think I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it anyways. So let me try to protect myself as much as I can, because I think racism is bad.
Mm-hmm.
I hate it. I want to eliminate it. However, I don't think you can get rid of racism just like you can't get rid of any idea by force. I think the only reason or the only way you can realistically eradicate racism is with persuasion and logic. I
Yep.
really think that. Um, and so I think that a lot of people who subscribe to identity politics, their hearts are in the right place, but they want to use force to achieve that goal.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you end up becoming the thing that you were fighting against. Because at its core, racism and transphobia and all these things, they're a form of oppression. They're a form of tyranny. But what good does it become to eradicate one form of tyranny if you just become the new tyrant in the process?
What's the old saying? Be careful when you fight monsters, lest you become one yourself.
Exactly. Yep. That's it. Who said that? Nietzsche or somebody?
I think it was Nietzsche. I
Yeah.
believe so. But no, I agree with you. I've been saying controversially that I don't think racism still exists because I don't feel that there are laws on the books that prevent people from doing things or oppress people based on their skin color, because there's no power behind it. I do think that there's still, and there always will be, human prejudices, based on class, based on status, based on opinion. Like that is unfortunately part of the human experience. It's human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something like when I run into people, like I consider myself conservative, and I look at things, and I was doing some research last night, and I'm like, oh, I kind of lean somewhat to like a classic libertarian as well. Like
Yeah.
some of their logic lines with mine. But like when I run into people that are left or progressive left, and they tell me that, oh, you're wrong for saying there's no racism existing, I'm like, well, we have to set the precedence of what I'm trying to say. Like, it is what I'm saying in the context of there's no laws, is that false? And they're like, no, you're right about that, but racism still exists. I said, so is that really racism, or is it a prejudice or bias against another individual based
So,
on go
sorry.
ahead. No,
I was just going to ask, when you say racism, are you referring to the new definition where racism is prejudice plus systematic power? And you're saying that you don't agree that systematic racism is enforced in our infrastructure?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify on that. I was just checking.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying one way or another. I was just asking. So
no. And that's the thing. The thing that amazes me is like most on the left or other individuals that I run to, most minorities, they don't know that there's a difference between the different definitions of racism, and that the one that I'm referring to is the one exactly like that you defined.
Yeah.
And that's why I try to tell them, like, let's set the precedence of what it is I'm trying to say. That way, if we can agree on that. And yeah, I'm taking a lot from Stephen Crowder, but I've learned a lot of about arguing, or not arguing, but having a debate based on watching a lot of Stephen Crowder and from debate what I learned in high school from debate classes. So
sure.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like what you're saying is that your personal experience has not been what's the word? Shoot, I can't think of it. It hasn't been harmonious with that definition, I guess. Like, or that's not a good way to put it. I guess basically what I'm saying is that you haven't experienced systematic racism as you were led to believe you would. Or have you?
I have I've experienced systemic prejudice against from not the how most minorities would say it would be from white people in power. I've actually experienced it from other minorities or black people in power, not whites. So that's why I challenged that notion. And it's amazing that, a lot of what I was told, like, I said that I can't do, have, because of my skin color and to have a fear and a hatred towards whites because of, you know, this mentality, this indoctrination that they hate you. They want nothing but the worst. They want to enslave you. They want to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, look at the last presidential election. People were saying that if Trump got elected, he's going to, you know, send all African Americans and minorities out of the country. Like, really?
Oh yeah, I had a lot of Hispanic friends that when Trump got elected, they were like, "Well, it was nice to know you, Segalacious. I won't be here much longer. About to get deported, probably." I was like, "No, man, don't say that." You know, like I think they were just joking, but yeah, that was a real fear. I think it continues to be a fear.
Yeah, and it's like, and you know, and for me, I think about that whole thing about deportation too. It's like, all right, so why would you fear being deported if you came here? Like, if you're not an immigrant, if you're actually you born here, you're a naturalized American, then why are you afraid of deportation? I would say the only people that should be afraid of deportation are the people who broke the law to come here in the first place or did it illegally, like stealing someone else's social security to get an ID or, you know, social security. You know, if you broke the law, then that would be the only reason to me that you would fear some type of repercussion. But
sure.
If you've done
maybe
nothing,
they're also afraid of racial profiling. It's like I didn't break the law, but I resemble someone who broke the law, and they might confuse me for them. Kind of a thing like that.
And even with the racial profiling thing, like I've heard a lot of people say that it's set up to be against those that are minorities because of the way they look. And I'm like, well, if you really were to dig deeper into why there is this quote unquote racial profiling, you have to look at the statistics of crime, you know, and that plays a large factor in it. And then I'm told that, oh, statistics are inaccurate because people make them up. And then I challenge that notion with, okay, so if statistics are infactual, if you can't rely on statistics to validate any type of claim, then what is the basis of standard that you're using to validate anything? You know, there has to be a bottom line on what we're using to measure X from Y.
Right. But what I think is so cool about talking to you is, you know, when I listen to you talk about some of the successes you've had, like that's the American dream, right? Like it's the idea that, hey, if I go out there and I work hard,
yeah,
I can get somewhere with that.
Yeah.
Because I will be respected as an individual. And if I merit the success, it'll come because I can work hard and I get to keep what I made and I can invest it how I want. And people are going to work with me.
Yeah.
You know, and it's the idea that economic freedom is, I think economic freedom has done just as much, if not possibly more. Well, okay, maybe let's walk it back. But I want to say that economic freedom is just as important to eliminating racism as any kind of political civil rights movement, because at the end of the day, it's not profitable to be a hater.
It's really not.
Right? Because like it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what your creed is or what your cultural background is. Your money's all the same color.
Yep. So
it's still green, you know? So you still want to work with it. So it doesn't pay to be a hater. So I think that free trade allows people to break down those barriers because it's mutually beneficial to both sides to trade and be peaceful.
Yeah.
You know, and that's part of the reason why we've experienced so much prosperity and peace in the West overall. I mean, there's been some hiccups, but you know, we have a lot to be grateful for. And you know, I think that we're forgetting to really keep in place those the separation of powers that are in the Constitution as well. Like if you look at Article 1, Section 8, that tells you exactly what Congress is allowed to do. Like Congress has specifically enumerated powers, and they're not allowed to do anything that's not in Article 1, Section 8. And but they do things that aren't in there. And also, did you know that the last time, like, okay, so only Congress has the power to issue a formal declaration of war.
Yeah.
Do you know the last time we've issued a formal declaration of war?
Not off the top of my head right now. No,
World War II.
I was assuming it would be that.
Yeah. I
Everything
mean,
else seems like a proxy war.
how many wars have we been in since World War II? You can't even count them on two hands.
Yeah, you can't.
Where's Congress? Who's
Yeah.
doing this? We don't have the power to do that. The government doesn't have that power to go to war without Congress declaring war. And yet we've done it multiple times. And actually, people have brought that up in Congress and they go, yeah, well, we wrote a bill. We passed a bill that said we give the president the right to, invade places for this many days in a limited way without declaring war. Because it gives us more flexibility. But that is an abdication of legislative power. You're giving powers that were given to, you're taking powers that were given to the legislative branch and you're abdicating them and delegating them over to the executive branch. The only problem is the power to delegate or abdicate your power is not a specifically enumerated power of Congress in Article 1, Section 8. It doesn't say in there, you can let the executive branch do your job. It doesn't say that. So like it's a problem. The separation of powers isn't preserved the way we thought. The executive branch has become the most powerful branch of government is supposed to be Congress.
Yeah.
And Congress is the slowest moving, hardest to work with, most do nothing branch of the government. But that's for a reason, because they have the most power, or they're supposed to. Because if you don't put a lot of safeguards there, there's a higher potential for tyranny. And also the judicial branch. Were you ever taught in school that it's the job of the judicial branch to interpret the Constitution? I was taught that in school.
What's interesting is the schools I went to as a kid before my mother pulled me out and homeschooled me.
Oh, yeah?
Never taught that.
Never taught that.
No.
Well,
the only thing they focused on was slavery.
Oh, yeah. Well, I took a civics class and they said, well, it's the executive branch's job to handle the military. It's the legislative branch's job to pass laws and tax bills. And it's the judicial branch's job to interpret the Constitution. The problem is the judicial branch, if you look in the Constitution at what it's allowed to do, it's allowed to do things towards the legislative and executive branch to put checks on them, to stop them if they think they're doing something they're not supposed to do. But it doesn't say in the specific judicial article, or I think it's article, I can't remember if it's article 2 or 3. I'm sorry. I'm talking about the Constitution like I'm an expert and I don't even know which article's which. I'm sorry. I think it's article 3.
3, yeah.
Yeah. But if you look in the judicial article, it doesn't say, the Supreme Court shall interpret the Constitution. It doesn't say that in there anywhere. The Supreme Court doesn't have the right to interpret the Constitution however they see fit. But there was a Supreme Court ruling where they gave themselves that right, which is a problem, right? So in a way, the Supreme Court is the most powerful branch of all because Congress can say, the executive branch can veto stuff if they don't like it. But if you try to pass a bill that's unconstitutional, for example, and I know I'm going to get hate for this, but technically the Affordable Care Act, as passed by Congress, the concept of healthcare at the federal level is not a specifically enumerated power of the Constitution. If you think it should be, then we should amend the Constitution and put it in there. But it's not in there. So they can't do it. But if the Supreme Court says, well, we're just going to reinterpret this, so now it's allowed. That's too much power because it allows the judicial branch to amend the Constitution without actually amending it, which is ridiculous. So you've got the judicial branch and the executive branch, and they've leached a ton of power off the legislative branch, which, I mean, when you vote, where does your vote really matter the most? It's not for the president. It's for your representative and senator. That's where you have the most influence. And guess what? That's supposed to be the strongest branch of government. And guess what? It's the weakest now. It's a big problem. And I mean, like, look at all the stuff that's going on. So I've already talked about how our foreign policy you could view it as unconstitutional because we never declare war whenever we go to war. That's a problem. Our money in Article 1, Section 10, do you know what it says about what kind of coinage shall be legal tender?
I forget. Refresh my memory on it.
Well, it says gold and silver. Our money's not backed by gold and silver anymore. It's just paper. It's fiat. There used to be a time when, our dollar bills, they were called bills because it was basically like it was temporary. Like, okay, hey, you have this much gold in the bank. You just don't want to carry it with you. So here's a greenback and you can change it. You can exchange it for gold at a bank at any point. Our money, the idea was you can trade in those pieces of paper for gold at any time. Gold and silver was the real money. Because the problem is if you don't have gold and silver, and if it's just pieces of paper, then there's nothing to stop the government from just printing as much money as it wants and putting it wherever they want. Does this sound familiar? Goldman Sachs, Federal Reserve, you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh man, the whole thing with the Federal Reserve, and if people really knew what that was.
Yeah, man, like central banking, like it's a big problem because, put it this way: if you don't think inflation is a problem, I remember when a Snickers bar was 35 cents.
Me too.
How much is it now? $1.29?
And Hawaii is $2.16.
Ouch. But that's the thing. The purchasing power of the dollar has gone down a lot. You know, when you're talking about video games, oh, well, they made this much money in 1998. And adjusting for inflation, that would have been like this much money nowadays. It's like, wait, what? I remember 1998. Holy crap. Has our money been worth a lot less than that already? Remember when the dollar menu was really $1?
Yep.
Problem is, the burger's the same, but the purchasing power of the dollar went down because of inflation. Gold and silver, you can't inflate those, man. There's a finite quantity. It was supposed to protect us against unfettered inflation. And I mean, inflation is like, we don't have hyper runaway inflation like the Weimar Republic yet. But I mean, the only thing, there's people in charge of how much inflation is going on. But the problem is there's people in charge of how much inflation is going on. That's too much power for somebody to have over an economy.
Yeah.
That's why people have moved to Bitcoin and stuff, because no one person can control the money supply with Bitcoin, even though it's not even gold and silver. So I'm just saying, like, our foreign policy is not constitutional. Our money is not constitutional. The NSA, they can go spy on you whenever they want without a warrant. That goes against the Fourth Amendment, protection against unreasonable search and seizures. I mean, I didn't even get to the Bill of Rights yet. You want to talk about one of the greatest documents ever that protects the rights of the individual? Check out the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Yep, that's true. You ever gone through a safety checkpoint, a police safety checkpoint, and they're like, "Give me your ID and your registration and your insurance and stuff," and it's like, "Well, what did I do?" "Oh, nothing. You just drove through this spot." "Well, then why are you taking my stuff?" "Oh, because I want to." "But what did I do wrong? What, do you suspect me of a crime?" "No, we don't suspect you of a crime." Like, I even asked a cop one time. I said, "Hey, man, if I'm walking down the street and you don't suspect me of any crimes, are you allowed to roll up on me and stop me and ask for my papers? Are you allowed to ask for my ID and for like passport or anything like that?" And they're like, "Well, no." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, because that's against the Fourth Amendment. We could do it if we had a warrant out for your arrest." And I said, "So why is it that you can't do it if I'm walking on foot, but if I'm in a car, you can do it?" You know? Yeah. But they can. But, well, it's for your safety, sir. So
it's complete, I don't mean infringement.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to sound like a crazy, like, anti-cop paranoid guy, but I'm just saying that things like police checkpoints and the NSA, like, they circumvent the Fourth Amendment all the time. In Canada, they don't even have free speech anymore. That's the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Like, they passed a law that you have to speak to people a certain way.
People kind.
Yeah, like if you don't speak to other people in a particular way, then it's a hate crime. And I'm not saying hate speech is okay, but if you try to make it illegal to like, if you try to say you have to use these pronouns or else you go to jail or you pay a fine, that's tyranny, man. Like there's no liberty there. Like your speech is the most important asset you have, the ability to communicate with other people. If somebody can control the way you communicate, are you even free?
Nope, not at
How are
all.
you not a slave?
And I don't think people realize that here in America, I mean, we're slowly transitioning to socialism and complete. Yeah. And once socialism is complete, I feel like the next step is a tyranny, like a dictatorship. And it's so. I feel like it was never made as apparent as it is within the last 9 years. Under Obama, like prior to that, it is kind of like someone try to tell you what to do. You're like, oh, F off. You're not going to tell me what to say. But under Obama, I'm not trying to throw shade at Obama, but I know a lot of people like him, especially minorities for whatever reason, but they can't name one single policy that he did that ever benefited them. Right. Anyway, back on topic.
Well,
go ahead. No, I was just going to say, like, it's just really interesting how, this whole politically correct censorship of speech. You can't say that because you're going to offend someone. So my words have power to hurt you in that way. Like if I say, oh, you're dumb or you're ignorant, even if there's some validity to it, that's a hate speech.
But see, that goes back to positive rights. I have the right to make you talk to me the way I want you to talk to me. I have the right to control your speech. That's a positive right. You're asking for a service. It's literally lip service. Like you're saying, I have the right to make you use the words I want when you speak to me. But that's not a right. Rights are not positive. They're negative rights. A right is basically you are justified in being left alone. You're not justified in running someone else's life the way you want to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the difference. But people don't understand that. But, when you brought up socialism, and you're right, that's a big problem because people use socialism to say, no, like I'm not advocating for Marxism. I'm just talking about socialism, But it doesn't matter what you call it. If you're eroding the fundamental freedoms of the individual and those protections for that individual, then you're heading towards totalitarianism. And it doesn't matter if that totalitarianism is Maoist or Stalinist or, Nazi or fascist or Marxist. It doesn't matter. Totalitarianism sucks no matter what political philosophy they subscribe to. A tyrant is a tyrant, And in fact, in a lot of ways, you could even argue that the type of tyranny we're facing with these false philanthropists is a type of moral tyrant. And you could make the case that a moral tyrant is worse than an immoral tyrant. Because here's what an immoral tyrant will do. An immoral tyrant will come up, slap you around, take your stuff, eat your food, and then leave you alone until they're hungry again.
Yeah.
But an immoral tyrant that's an immoral tyrant. But a moral tyrant might do all the same things, but then afterwards, they want to tell you how to live your life. At least an immoral tyrant, after they take your stuff, they let you live your life how you want.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
So not only are we dealing with tyranny, we're dealing with moral tyrants. They're even worse.
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you talk about Republicans and Democrats, I feel like it's a false dichotomy. It's not really a true choice between, do you want right tyranny or left tyranny? And in fact, actually, do you want socialism on the left or freedom on the right? Do you want socialism for Democrats or capitalism and economic freedom for Republicans? Technically, I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and I hope I don't offend you, Mekel, or anybody else, but both sides are technically socialist. Like a Democrat is socialist because they want to give money to poor people and have social programs.
Mm-hmm.
A Republican, mainstream Republicans, they're socialist, but it's just socialism for rich people. Like Democrats want to put poor people on welfare. Republicans want to put rich people on welfare. When Goldman Sachs goes bankrupt and all those CEOs are about to lose all their money, then everybody goes, oh, here, quick, take this money. We'll just print some money out. Here you go. We'll put you on welfare, rich CEOs. You know, it's still socialism.
Mm-hmm.
They're just arguing over what kind. But it doesn't matter what kind, you're still screwed because you can make the case that socialism doesn't help poor people get out of poverty. Like it's kind of like a short-term solution, but like under socialism, you don't generate more wealth, more net wealth in the economy. And you may have heard the phrase, a rising tide raises all ships.
Yeah.
A poor person in a first world country is better off than a poor person in a third world country. Now, the gap between a rich and a poor person is larger in a first world country than in a third world country.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in a country where obesity is a bigger problem than starvation.
That says a lot, too.
Yeah. Poor people are worried about getting too fat in this country. They're not worried about starving to death. And that's because there's more wealth, right? There's capitalism here. But that's being threatened, you know, and it's kind of scary. So anyway, you know, and you could even say that, well, it's not just Republicans who want to bail out rich people. Hillary's the same way. The military industrial complex only helps rich people. I mean, if you think all these invasions into the Middle East and around the world and all our foreign interventions are to spread freedom and not to line the pockets of big business and weapons contractors, then you just don't realize that it's a racket. But it's a type of, you are subsidizing rich people. You're subsidizing businesses. It's welfare for rich people. It's socialism, you know, so.
No, you're very right.
Anyways, so that's kind of why I feel like there's not a big difference between a Republican and a Democrat nowadays, because they're just arguing about, they're not arguing about should there be less power in the government. Nobody hardly ever talks about the Constitution. I think the last time I heard somebody really talk about the Constitution was Rand Paul when he was doing that filibuster to like try to stop the FISA courts and the NSA from superseding the Fourth Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, like Republicans and Democrats, they never talk about the Constitution. Like in our country, we are headed towards a cliff and we're going to careen off the cliff and lose all of our carefully constructed, logical, Enlightenment philosophy values that were designed to insulate and protect the freedoms of the individual from tyranny. And we're going to lose all that. We're going to careen off the cliff. And the Republicans and Democrats are not arguing over should we go over the cliff or not. They're arguing who gets to drive over the cliff. I want to be in the driver's seat. That's what they're arguing over. Not where are we going. They both want to go the same place. They just want to take credit for it, for getting there. Yeah. So that's how I feel about Democrats and Republicans. I don't feel like there's a real difference between them because they don't care about the issues of substance, which are our constitutional values and the erosion thereof. But obviously you might not agree, and I'm not trying to say you have to, but that's just how I feel. So
no, it's not that I don't agree. What I do is I take people's perspectives and I assess it, and then I don't always immediately give a response like this. Like the case that you've made is pretty valid. So this is something that's gonna have to sit and marinate with me for a minute before I can give a response. And you know, that's one thing. You know, I notice a lot of people when you have debates or discussions with them, a lot of people expect an immediate response or immediate answer, and it's like sometimes you can't give that. You know, I've learned that, especially like with my wife. Like I'll say something to her, or she'll give her some information, and she'll be like, you know what? I'll get back to you later with a response. Like I need some time to think about it. And
oh, totally.
I mean, definitely with this, like this information, the case you presented, it makes a lot of sense. And when you break it down that way, true. It they do both come off as both socialistic, and it it makes me wonder, like, what do you think the solution should be? Should we remove both parties and just have one, or?
Good question. Yeah, what's the remedy, right?
Mhm.
George Washington was very against political parties. He said political parties are going to screw the country up, to paraphrase. That'd be great if that was his actual quote. Political parties are going to screw up this country, Bobby. Make him talk like Hank Hill. That'd be great.
I know, right?
Gosh, yeah, political parties are a problem, but only in so much as people keep feeding into the false dichotomy. Like, I feel like we've got this two-party monopoly where everybody's like the news, like just how you showed the video today of all the news people being paid to say the same things. I mean, if you don't think right-wing news anchors and left-wing news anchors are being paid by the same corporate guys that are also getting welfare from the government, in the form of subsidies, then take another look, because they're all under the same payroll. It's like kabuki theater. It's like pro wrestling. I feel like the Democrats and Republicans are like, it's like pro wrestling where it's like a soap opera where they pretend like they hate each other and they argue over stuff and they pretend like they're so different and they have these fundamental disagreements that are going to make such a huge difference when really they don't. They never argue about anything that really matters. And then behind the scenes, they shake hands and they go, hey, it doesn't matter who gets elected as long as people vote for X or Y. We're both going to do the same thing secretly anyhow. We'll just behind closed doors all agree that we're going to do the same. Like, did you notice, like, Bill Clinton was like, oh man, I'm not going to be like George Bush because I'm not going to go do a lot of foreign policy stuff. And then he gets in and like he invades. I don't know. He sent military units into all these other countries, but he said, no, but it's to protect all the foreign aid we're sending. That's why we're sending soldiers out there. And then when George W. Bush, in the year 2000 got elected, he was like, the era of big government is over. I'm not going to be like Clinton, and I'm not going to try to police the world like he did.
Mm-hmm.
And then 9/11 happens, and he's like, well, guess I better police the world. And then Obama gets elected. What's that?
The war on terror.
The war on terror.
Yeah.
Still not over. That's a great thing about a war is you can say, well, it's an emergency. I can suspend your rights if it's an emergency because we're at war. Oh, what country are we at war with? Where's the declaration of war? Oh, well, it's not a country. We're at war with terror. We're at war. We have a war on drugs. It's a war on poverty. So I can do whatever I want until I win the war on drugs / poverty / terrorism / whatever. You could insert whatever political movement you want to put in there. And you can just have unlimited power and people will give it to you, because you're tricking them. And when Obama got elected, he was like, I'm going to close Gitmo. Did he close Gitmo?
Nope.
No.
Nope.
And then Donald Trump was like, hey, I'm going to not be so invasive into foreign policy as Obama was. And he's like, changed my mind. Like and by the way, look, I'm not trying to tell anybody who they should support or who they should not support. I'll tell you right now, I didn't vote for Trump. I didn't vote for Hillary, but I voted. I didn't vote for either of them. I didn't like either of them because I felt like they were the same thing. And if you don't mind, Mekel, if this is okay with you, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I feel like Trump has measured up to the standard of the Constitution so far.
Hey, the Kasanova podcast is a free market, dude. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So this is kind of how I feel. And, agree or disagree with me, it's okay.
Okay.
But I feel like, one, the wall. I don't like the wall. I don't like the idea of we need to build a wall to protect ourselves. Because that whole idea of trading freedom for security is scary. Open borders are more of a key indicator to a free and prosperous society than closed borders. Open borders have more to do with free trade than closed borders. In fact, I can think of a place that built a wall, and it was East Germany, like East Berlin.
Berlin Wall.
Right. And I don't want to build a Berlin Wall between us and Mexico. And I know the immigration issue is a problem and stuff, but I don't think that building a wall is the solution. Also, is it a specifically enumerated power of Congress to sanction building a huge wall? I don't know that they have that ability. I don't know that that's constitutional. But here's the biggest thing. I don't like the idea of building a wall to keep people out, because it's not that it's keeping people out. I'm afraid that they'll say, I'm building this to keep people out. And once it's built, they're like, psych, now we can keep you in. A wall built to keep someone out can be used the other way. It's a two-edged sword, So I'm skeptical of that. I'm not crazy about the idea of a wall.
I disagree with you on the wall, but
okay.
Go ahead.
All right. 2, I don't know if you noticed, but he's been instrumental in championing and passing a lot of tariffs on steel and different stuff like that with other countries.
Mm-hmm.
And a tariff is basically putting a tax on imported stuff. And what he'll say is, I am supporting our local American businesses. People will buy American because tariffs will make it so that people won't want to outsource. It'll create more jobs in America. But the problem is, tariffs go against the concept of economic freedom. And there's an economic phenomenon called I just wrote it down and I forgot what it was. Oh, comparative advantage. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the way comparative advantage works is, let's say, I don't know, this is kind of a weird example, but let's say you live in a country where the climate makes it easier to grow peanuts. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to grow bananas. All right. And you're trying to grow both. And you're growing some half bananas and half peanuts, but the peanuts are doing better. And the bananas kind of suck and there's not as many, but you're doing what you can. But then there's a country south of you that sucks at growing peanuts, but they're great at growing bananas. And they have the same problem, but in reverse.
Okay.
If you made a deal with them and said, hey, how about I only grow peanuts, you only grow bananas, and we trade? Like, this is comparative advantage. It actually turns out that competition of other markets, like, because people in your country would say, well, wait a minute, you're going to put all the banana people in America out of work because you're outsourcing our banana products to other countries. But it's like, look, you actually lose more money on trying to invest in the infrastructure to create bananas in a place where bananas shouldn't be grown. Like, you're going against the flow there. It turns out that if you allow for free trade, even though you could say, well, you're not supporting banana businesses, it turns out if you try to support those banana businesses and it's not efficient to do so, the overall net wealth in your nation goes down. But if you allow for free trade, both sides get wealthier. Like, both sides increase. Free trade creates wealth on both sides because you're not supposed to make a trade that's not mutually beneficial. If both sides benefit from the trade, then the net wealth increases. And even if you choose not to trade and try to do it all on your own, you still experience a loss. And the loss would be, what was the potential amount of wealth you would have gained had you traded? And so I really feel like those tariffs interfere with our ability to have comparative advantage. And he's going to make everybody less wealthy in this country because of that. It's like the broken window fallacy. Well, no, because you're helping the steel people in America. You're helping the steel workers here. You're buying American. Well, no, what you did was made people buy a product that's more expensive and maybe less quality, or maybe you made them hire labor that wasn't as efficient as they could have in a different deal. Mm-hmm. And what happens is you just take money from one person's pocket, you put it in somebody else's pocket. The wealth didn't increase, and actually it goes down. And so I feel like tariffs are a bad idea.
Okay.
Also, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, right? That is to give individuals the protection against tyranny. It's like, you know what? At the end of the day, we've put all these checks and balances in place, but you know what? If it doesn't work, here's a gun. you point it at those guys and make sure that they're following the Constitution. You know what I mean? I'm not saying literally you should go up with a gun and like point it at people in Washington, D.C. and be like, follow the Constitution or I'll shoot you or something. Like, my phrasing was unfortunate there. I should be more careful with that. But what I'm saying is the idea is if you want to be left alone, if you want to protect your right to be left alone, you can't always rely on the government to do it for you. If you can't, protect yourself. You have the right to. Here you go. Mm-hmm. And President Trump recently, you may have seen this. He said, well, because the vice president, what's his name? Pence, right? Pence was like, I have this idea for what if we give somebody due process, and if we find them unfit to own a firearm, then we take away their right for a firearm after due process. And Trump goes, how about we take away the firearm before due process? How about that? Like, that was his great idea. Blatantly unconstitutional. And at the end of the day, I feel like his foreign policy isn't any different than Obama's. You know, campaign Trump and reality Trump are different. Campaign Obama and reality Obama are different. Campaign Bush, campaign Clinton, campaign other Bush were all different than real Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama, right? So they say one thing, they get in power, and they just do the same thing as everybody else has always done. And they don't care about the Constitution like they should. And I feel like Trump hasn't changed that trend. So that's how I feel like he's measured up there. And I know that's kind of harsh, man, but I made that realization back a while ago when I thought I liked Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. And somebody showed me a video where Mitt Romney and Obama were both talking, and they were all saying the same things. They were both saying the same things. They both wanted to do basically the same things when they got in office. They just were arguing over who gets to do it, who gets to take the credit. And that was hard for me to learn because I really wanted to like that guy. And also, I voted for Obama because I thought I should be a Democrat after George W. Bush. Because I thought, that he did a bad job, so Republicans are bad, so the Democrats are good. Then I voted for Obama, and he didn't do anything different. And I was like, what? And I thought, well, maybe Romney. And then I was like, no, they're all the same, man. So that's kind of my 2 cents there. And, you know, that might have ruffled some feathers. But, hey, if you want to support Trump, I respect you. You know, that's fine. I'm just voicing my frustration is all. So.
No, that's, you know, it's fine. Like I respect your opinion on that. I still back Trump. I'm still on Trump train.
No, I'm not trying to not have you back Trump. I'm just saying that I'm on the Constitution side, and I'm not convinced that Trump is.
So. No, I understand that. There's a lot of things that, you know, like you said about the right to due process when he was talking about just taking the guns out of people's hands. It's like, if you really want to break that down further, like if we're targeting people that have mental illness to take guns away from them, then you're going to be taking that for the majority of the American population, because in some form or way or fashion or another, nearly everyone identifies as having some type of depression at some point, and depression is also part of a mental illness. So it's like, okay, then if anyone who has ever been depressed, like say if you're, you know, if someone's parents have passed away or a loved one or a dog and you're depressed about that, hey, you're mentally ill. You can't have a gun. So,
right.
You know, there's a lot of things that,
you're a violent felon.
Yeah.
You've been released from jail, but you have a history of armed robbery. So maybe we shouldn't let you have a gun because you lost that privilege, you know, lost that right.
Right. You know, there's a lot of things. Like I agree that there's a lot of things that are said that don't line up with the Constitution. And I think that's just a problem that we've had with our political system in itself. You know, it's become less about the people, or significantly less about the people, and more about personal interests or group personal interests. You know, how do they maintain themselves? So I agree with you on that. There's when you break it down there's a lot of issues and a lot of things aren't getting addressed. And yeah,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right.
Oh, one thing I had a kind of a zinger here. I think it's kind of a zinger about why it's so important to promote individual freedoms and to be a proponent of individuality.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be racist if you treat everyone like an individual.
Exactly.
If you think about it, if you think about it, like socialism, Marxism, politically correct culture, postmodernism, these are all collectivist concepts. But racism is just an ugly form of collectivism. But if you are an individualist, you by extension eliminate racism. So I feel like that's the best way to fight racism is to treat everybody like individuals.
And the hardest thing is when you act like an individual, especially when you're, in a minority group. There's a lot of pushback on that.
Yeah,
a lot of it, and it's really disgusting. It's
right.
like, no, you need to be about us as a people, and it's like I can't speak for everyone because my experiences are not going to be your experiences. My thoughts, we don't come off of a factory assembly line, so we can't have group mentality because and this is one of the things I've said to one of my friends who's all about socialism, and a lot of people I know, a lot of friends, they're like, oh, we need to have democratic socialism. I'm like, just because you throw democratic in front of socialism doesn't change the concept that it is socialism.
Right.
Like, the problem with socialism as a whole is, or the crux of it, the bane of it, is going to be individualism, freedom of thought, freedom of choice. It's the nature of humanity. You can't make a system where we need equality for everyone. Well, you know what? If you have equality for it could never work because everyone's not going to work the same. Everyone's not going to want X, Y, and Z. You might say, hey, we're going to give everybody burgers equally, but I don't like burgers. I'm vegan.
I don't want the same burgers as everybody. I want less because I like tacos. Yeah.
Right.
Well, or like Bill Gates, everybody's like, he's so rich that if he saw $100 on the ground, it's not worth his time to pick it up because he makes more than $100 per second, every second. And it's like, yeah, like, okay, I understand the envy, but that dude works 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the time. Yeah, he's a multi-billionaire several times over, but I wouldn't want to work that hard, to be honest, man. I don't want to work as hard as those billionaires work. I just don't. Some people do, and they're happy, and they want to. Mm-hmm. I like to work hard. I don't like to work 18 hours a day hard. That's all I'm saying. I like my beauty sleep.
So there's a question in the comment section they were asking about, and this is from Topher Homokin. He wanted to ask about the omnibus bill. Like, what's your take on it?
Oh, well, it looks like it's about time for me to head out. I got it. I'm just kidding. The omnibus bill. I don't know much about it, to be honest. I really don't. I'm going to display my ignorance here. I've kind of stopped watching news. I've stopped following politics closely because I just feel like it's a cycle. And maybe could you please fill me in on what the omnibus bill is about, and maybe I could tell you how I feel about some of the parts of it. I'm sorry that I'm not as informed as I should be. Maybe you can help me. I appreciate it. And I want to say that's part of the reason why I like talking with you, Mekel, because you and I can share ideas and share opinions, and it's not an argument, and we're not trying to one-up each other. There's not a winner and a loser. We're just sharing ideas and learning from each other and helping each other to figure out what the right thing to do is,
So basically with the omnibus bill, from what I understand, and, it's kind of harder for me to understand everything in it because, I'm still newer to understanding politics and parties and bills and legislations. But from what I gather, I mean, like Topher Homican said in the chat, it sucks. It does.
Well, if it sucks, I'm against it.
Yeah. So there's, there's, I think, very like one. I think out of the 20 billion that Trump wanted for the wall, he only got like 1 point something billion. So there's that. Then they're pushing more towards funding pretty much just socialistic things, But he did get more money for the military, which, I do agree that we did need more money for the military. I think a lot of my friends that are in the military have talked about how, a lot of their equipment, weaponry, and all that stuff was just outdated, and they just needed more funding. Now they're getting raises and whatnot. So I'm like, I'm for that.
Yeah.
So,
And the thing that really gets me about the military is those guys swore an oath to defend and uphold the Constitution, and they do their best to do that. And we betray them
constantly.
by upholding a government that breaks their oath to uphold the Constitution. So we've got people out there fighting to uphold it, and we don't defend it at home with our votes and our efforts. And we are abusing their loyalty. We have abused the loyalty of our military, and it makes me sick inside. I wish we could honor them better. I really do. Not sure what the way to do it is, but it's something that keeps me up at night thinking about sometimes. But I would say that if there are things in the omnibus bill that are of questionable constitutionality, I'm unhappy with it. And if building the wall is part of the omnibus, I feel like that wall is unconstitutional. And the point of the Constitution is to give the government a restraint. It's to limit the government's power. And I feel like if you give the government the power to wall off itself and keep us inside, it gives them more power overall. And I think it goes against the purpose of the Constitution. One of the most important things you can look at is actually the 10th Amendment. Earlier when I talked about Article 1, Section 8 being the specifically enumerated powers of Congress, of the legislative branch and the Senate, the 10th Amendment says any power not specifically enumerated and given to the federal government shall be given to the states, shall be given to the state government.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to do something, take care of it at the state level, and at least then you're not doing it on all 50 states. You're doing it in one place. So even if you screw it up, at least you only screwed up in one place, not every place. I don't feel like the place to do stuff like that isn't specifically enumerated in the Constitution is at the federal level. I don't think it belongs there. That's what I think. Maybe we should have a bill to get rid of all the bills in the federal government and start doing more stuff in our own states. Maybe we should start worrying about ourselves and stop trying to make everybody do what we want at the federal level. Make it more local. And then when we get to the state level, say, well, hey, how about instead of making the whole state do it, maybe just this county and maybe just this city? I'm just saying, I don't like the idea of, I don't think somebody in Georgia should make somebody in Hawaii do something that would make sense in Georgia, but not Hawaii, That's why we have different states.
That's very true. There's another question in the comments from one from Liquid Metal. He says,
hey, Liquid.
Yeah. So he says, I have a question for Segalacious. Do you think American presidents in general actually have power, or do you think big corporations actually rule the U.S. and the rest of the world?
Well, they have constitutional powers. But if Liquid Metal, your question kind of is going in the vein of, like, who's really running our country? Is it our elected officials or is it the corporations? And really, I think corporatism is a big problem. And I think socialism is part of that, because socialism allows the government to interact with the economy and with big businesses in a way that they perhaps shouldn't. But it goes both ways. Not only can the government oppose and be tyrannical in the free market, there are certain unsavory captains of industry that can go the other way and use the government to influence the economy to benefit themselves. And so I think that what we're having in this country isn't true capitalism. I think we have what's called corporatism, where the economy is manipulated to serve the corporate elite. And I think that our politicians, including the president, is definitely in bed with them. So if the question is the president's power limited by corporate stakeholders, I guess is what you would call it, I would say absolutely yes. I do think that there's a lot of power behind the throne, and that it's kind of like separation of church and state.
Mm-hmm.
Like on the one hand, you want to protect people so that they can have freedom from religion, but also separation of church and state protects your religion from the tyranny of the state, so that the state can't tell you what to believe. It goes both ways. And I kind of feel like we should have a separation of business and state in a way. Like I wish we could have more of it, because not only does it protect businesses, small businesses, from government tyranny, but it also protects government from the influence of corporations too.
Yeah,
So
that's very true. I guess that's all the questions we had.
all right. Yeah, it looks like we went over a little bit.
It was a good conversation. Like, you know, I enjoy talks like these, especially when it's opinions that are different than my own, because I'm of the mindset, and I didn't always used to be this way, but I've learned from watching my parents and other people that sometimes it's best to be slow to speak and quick to listen, and learn from, you know, people that are different than you. That's something that neither of my parents are very good at.
I'm not that good at that either. I should listen more than I talk. I need to work on that. But, you know, I just want you to know I respect you, even though I was getting a lot of stuff off my chest and sharing a lot of stuff with you. You know, my mama voted for Trump. You know, it's cool. I don't have anything against anybody who voted for Trump or Hillary. I'm equally disappointed in all of you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. But no, I still totally, I have huge respect for you, Mekel. You know, I think you're very insightful, and you know, just listening to you talk and you say things that are so important, it just gets me really jazzed up. So I'm really grateful you had me on here to politic with you one time. I got excited. I'm grateful for you for doing that.
Oh man, it's a pleasure, man. And I think the problem I'm seeing with a lot of people is the inability to be able to talk about differences and be able to come to like some type of middle ground. And that's one thing I really miss that people are not able to do anymore. It's just talk about things. Like we can disagree, but we can disagree civilly, and we can try and figure out what the solutions might be. And it's like, I think that's one of the problems that we have with having the two-party system. Is like they almost don't agree on anything.
Yeah, they really don't. They really don't. Even though behind closed doors, they probably agree with a lot more stuff than we thought. I mean, you know, Trump and Hillary were like best buddies before he became a political candidate, right? Like they were big time in cahoots. The Clintons and Trump were tight, like tight back in the 90s, you know, big time. Yeah. So, but that being said, I do feel like I just want to say that as frustrated as I am with Trump, I am not more or less frustrated with him as I was with Obama, or Bush or Clinton or anybody like that. You know, I do think that people need to have a return to civility and have some respect for the office. I don't like the way people have besmirched the office of the presidency and degraded it just because somebody that's in there that they don't like. Like I still call him President Trump. And I think that as our president, you know, we should give him a measure of respect, even if we disagree with him. And all we have to do is hold him to the Constitution. And even if you don't like him, he can't do anything that's going to harm you as long as you make him follow the Constitution. You know, so it shouldn't matter.
That's exactly true. And it's like, you know, I live out here in Hawaii. It's a very blue state. And I hear all the time when people say they hate Trump, they can't stand him. And I'll ask them, I say, can you define your terms of what it is about him that you hate? Like what policy, what procedure? I just hate everything about him. I'm like, well, that's a very generalized, broad term. Like you need to be able to break down what it is he's done that you dislike so strongly. Because if you can't, you're just saying something for the sake of saying it. And a lot of people, I feel like they live in an echo chamber of, you know, it's popular think and everyone else is saying it, so I'm gonna say it too. And you know, and it's that's a very scary situation to be in. That's why, like, you know, when I talk about things like Black Lives Matter and the systemic oppression that people like, you know, minorities and blacks like to say exists, it's like, you know, I don't agree with that. And it's, speaking, I know this is completely off topic of the political talks we're having, but
Okay.
I'm finding a lot of people, how Black Lives Matter likes to rally about everything, and they say how there's always a suppression, this and that. And I'm finding that individuals that, are Black, that come from other countries like Jamaica, the Caribbean, a lot, even often from Africa, they come here. They don't align with the thinking of Black Americans, the whole victimhood, and more often than not, they rail against it. And they're like, why are you acting like that?
Yeah, well, but that just goes to show that just because your skin is a certain color, it doesn't mean all your cultural values will be the same and that you'll agree with everyone who's the same skin color as you.
Exactly.
Like, you can't just homogenize people just because their skin color. You can't say they're all the same. They all believe the same things, and they all have solidarity in their political stances and things like that. They all care about the same things equally. You got to treat them like individuals, just like anybody else. And I mean, that's a perfect point of it.
Yeah.
So, by the way, as an aside, I want to go against everything I've said and try to get the group together to protest and make you play Shenmue against your will.
Oh man, I'm actually gonna just go ahead and emulate it since I can't get
oh, cool.
I can't get whatchamacallit to my Dreamcast. Like, I can't get the VGA adapter to HDMI to work. Like, I can get the video out, I cannot get audio out, and no matter what I've tried to do, it won't work. So I'm probably just gonna emulate it and stream it from there. And
it's a pain. I bought an RGB cord because I was like, you know what? I'm gonna stream it. I'll show that Mekel. I'll stream it myself, and I'll show him it's easy. I bought an RGB SCART cord, hooked it up to my converter box to HDMI, and it wasn't compatible. I couldn't do it, so I wasted that money. So I'm having trouble too getting it to work. It's hard to stream a Dreamcast.
It really is. Oh, that game collector said I told you to buy Akura.
Hey, that takes 4 months, game collector. You know that. They live in Turkey. I will never see that thing. Even if I order it, I'm $60 more broke, and I still have to wait for a long time. I would like one though. So,
me too.
So, DGC, please, you could donate to my Patreon, and I could order one. I'm just kidding. I don't have a Patreon.
All right, go ahead and tell people where they can find you and whatever videos or projects that you have in the works.
Okay, once again, I'm Segalacious of Oh So Jiggly. I usually don't talk politics at all on my channel. I just talk about video games. I like Sega. I like Nintendo. I like Xbox. I like PlayStation. Sony. Really like Virtua Fighter. I like fighting games. I like Shenmue. I like Sonic. So stuff like that. I make videos. We have a fun time. Come on over sometime. My most popular video, not my most popular and unpopular video, is why Virtua Fighter is deeper than Tekken. Ooh. Yeah. I didn't say better though. Just said deeper. I like both better. But that one's got over 100,000 views now. And it's got, I don't know, it's got a couple thousand likes, couple thousand dislikes also.
And don't you wish that like all the videos that we had there, like thousands upon thousands of views, would be like subscribers?
Oh, yeah, but it's all good. I'd rather have a few people that are really my friends than a bunch of fake ones, so I'm cool with it. Also, I make Virtua Fighter lore videos, so if you're interested in the story behind Virtua Fighter, come check it out.
Definitely. And we should definitely do a collaboration podcast with yourself, me, and that game collector. We can talk fighting games, video games in general. Maybe even another political Discord like this one time. I think it'd be interesting.
It would. I'm up for it, Mekel, anytime.
All right. So, all right. Thank you guys for watching the Kasanova podcast. This is episode 19. I'm really grateful to all of you that have been enjoying this podcast series. I can't believe we've hit 10 million listens on iTunes. This is insane. I never knew the the podcast market was like this. And it's just, this is a simple podcast. There's nothing fancy. I don't have like graphics or music or anything popping in and out. But yeah, I appreciate you guys, and definitely go subscribe to Segalacious' channel. I have all the links down in the description below, and that's all I have to say. Thank you guys.